everyone. Welcome back to the Brooklynite TV Podcast. I'm your host, Frank. And today I woke up and my webcam is giving me an issue. I see white spots and it's blurry, so please bear with me while I get through today's podcast, and then I'll look to see about ordering another webcam. But again, welcome back. And we're going to dive deep today, again, into President Biden's bad decision to send long-range missiles to Ukraine. As we explore the dangerous consequences of this move, we'll look at the escalating Russian response, the growing risk of nuclear conflict, and how this decision has put both Ukraine and us here in the United States in an increasingly perilous position. So grab your coffee, sit back, and let's break it down. But first, if you enjoy thoughtful discussions and no-hold-barred analysis, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends. We need to keep this conversation going. Again, welcome back, listeners. Today, we need to dive into this critical topic that I touched in my last episode. It's a subject that continues to dominate the news and our global discourse, the decision by President Biden to send those missiles to Ukraine. As I said it before, and I'll stand by it, it was a huge mistake, and the ramifications are becoming even more dire as we watch the news unfold. Ukraine and the world are now facing the consequences of Biden's bad decision. In fact, we've effectively poked the bear, and now Russia is not just angry, it's responding with terrifying actions. Sending advanced missile systems to Ukraine didn't just help them defend their territory, it escalated the conflict to new dangerous heights, and now we're dealing with the fallout. To say that Russia feels provoked would be an understatement. In response to these missile shipments, Russia has ramped up its rhetoric, and more than that, its actions recently. Moscow launched a series of tests involving their most advanced nuclear capable missiles. This includes the launch of intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and more notably, hypersonic missile tests. For those who don't know, hypersonic missiles are a game changer. They're capable of flying at speeds greater than 5 times the speed of sound, which makes them extremely difficult to intercept and track. In essence, they've dramatically reduced the time to target, which increases the risk of escalation in a crisis situation. When you see these kinds of missile tests and the threats that accompany them, it's impossible not to feel the weight of the situation. Russia is sending a very clear message. They are prepared to escalate this conflict to levels that could involve nuclear warfare if provoked any further. And that's exactly what we've done. Biden's decision to send these weapons didn't just invite Russian anger, it particularly guaranteed it. In a recent speech, Russian officials have threatened unpredictable consequences should the U.S. and NATO continue their support of Ukraine's defense. They've gone beyond the usual saber-rattling rhetoric. These are serious threats and need to be taken seriously. Russia has already invoked its doctrine of escalate to de-escalate, which is essentially their strategy for using nuclear weapons to force their adversaries to back off in the event of military conflict. With the West continuing to supply Ukraine with more advanced weaponry, Russia sees this as an existential threat. But here's the real tragedy in all this. Ukraine is worse off now, and so are we. Let's be clear, Ukraine didn't ask for this war. They didn't ask to be caught in the middle of geopolitical struggles between the U.S. and Russia. They're a country fighting for survival. I get that. But they are also now in a situation where their very existence is being used as a pawn in a larger, more dangerous game. By escalating the conflict with missile shipments, Biden has not helped Ukraine. In fact, it's made things worse for them. The Russian military is growing more aggressive day by day, and civilians are paying the price. The infrastructure damage to Ukraine, the loss of life, and the devastation of Ukraine cities continues to escalate. While the West insists that it's helping Ukraine defend itself, the reality is far more complex. Every time a missile system is sent, Russia responds with greater force, and Ukrainian people suffer more. It's hard to deny that this conflict is increasingly becoming a war of attrition, with Ukraine bleeding resources and soldiers in a fight that may be ultimately unwinnable. And they're bleeding our resources. As much as the U.S. and NATO may hope to pressure Russia into retreat, the reality is that we may be pushing Russia into a corner where their only option is to escalate further, or worse, resort to nuclear weapons as a means of securing their survival. And that's not helping Ukraine at all. So let's be honest here. Biden's decision to send missiles wasn't just a strategic blunder, it's become a humanitarian crisis. Ukraine is worse off today than it was yesterday before these decisions were made. Their civilian infrastructure is in ruins, their people are living in constant fear of Russian retaliation, and they are caught in increasingly unwinnable conflict. This is not the outcome we should be aiming for. The consequences for the U.S. were also profound. President Biden's handling of this crisis, like he's handled everything in the last 4 years, is disastrous. And this puts us on a path that could lead to a direct confrontation with Russia. As much as the U.S. has tried to distance itself from direct military engagement, we're walking a razor's edge here. The more we pour into Ukraine, the harder it becomes to avoid direct involvement. In fact, Russia sees every missile strike, every artillery piece as a direct provocation against them from us here in the United States. And if they decide to retaliate, we could be looking at something far worse than a proxy war. We could be looking at a nuclear conflict. But beyond that, there's also an issue of American security. We are already seeing the economic fallout from this war, rising energy prices, inflation, supply chain disruptions, and instability in global markets. And all of this has been exacerbated by the ongoing conflict, and it's hitting ordinary Americans in their pocketbooks. As Biden prepares to exit the White House and Donald Trump take over, the question becomes, what happens next? How will the next administration deal with the mess Biden has created? The reality is Biden's foreign policy, especially in handling of the Ukraine crisis, has left a deeply polarized and unstable situation. Trump will inherit this nightmare and will have to navigate a far more dangerous world. There are those who argue that Trump, with his American first approach, may pursue a more isolationist strategy, pulling back from the conflict and letting Europe handle its own issues, which I think he should do. On the other hand, Trump has been known for his unpredictability, so it's impossible to know for sure just what Donald Trump will do. But one thing is certain, Trump will have to reckon with this consequence of Biden's mistakes. Whether it's finding a way to negotiate with Russia, de-escalate the situation, or try to maintain the Western alliance, Trump will face challenges that could reshape the global order. And here's the kicker. Now Trump will have to decide whether to double down on Biden's policies or pursue a drastic change of course. The stakes have never been higher. The clock is ticking, and every decision made from here on out could have catastrophic consequences for global peace, stability, and security. To wrap up, the decision to send missiles to Ukraine was inside a tragic mistake. Thank you, Joe Biden. It was a provocation that escalated the conflict, put Ukraine in an even worse position, and opened the door for a far more dangerous world. Russia feels cornered, and their response has been increasingly aggressive, including the use of advanced nuclear-capable missiles. The threats of nuclear war are not just rhetoric, they are a real, tangible risk. Joe Biden has made a catastrophic miscalculation, and now the world is paying the price. Ukraine is suffering, and so are we. As we move forward, people will have to reckon with the consequences of Joe Biden's decisions. And as Biden exits and Trump prepares to step in, the future remains uncertain. But one thing is clear, the mistakes have been made, and they could define the world we live in for generations to come. The question now is, how do we get out of this mess? Stay tuned, folks. We'll be watching this together. So that's it for today's episode of the Brooklynite TV Podcast. I hope you're leaving with a clearer understanding of the stakes and what's at risk here as this conflict continues to unfold. Remember, this is just the beginning of a much bigger conversation, so stay tuned for future episodes. We'll be diving deeper into this and other pressing issues. If you like what you heard today, please share this podcast with your network, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on our next podcast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Brooklynite TV Podcast. That's it for today, people.